Welcome to KYNDversation, a space for sacred dialogue, honest reflection, and deep listening. I'm your host, Kendra Frazier. KYNDversation was born from my own inner dialogue, my journey of spirituality through life's unfoldings, questions, and becoming. Along the way, I discovered something essential, that transformation often happens not in isolation, but in conversation. In this podcast, I sit with people from diverse faith traditions, spiritual paths, and lived experiences to explore one central question. What does devotion mean to you? And how does your relationship to the sacred shape your life? My hope is that each conversation becomes a light post for those who feel challenged, disconnected, or searching for belonging. And that through our shared reflection, you might find courage, clarity, and deeper connection to yourself. Wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome here. Welcome to KYNDversations, where every conversation is a sacred practice. We feature diverse conversation partners across faiths and fields, and together we explore their spiritual journeys, stories, questions, and wisdom that awaken their soul and invite us all more deeply into who we are becoming. I have the opportunity of being your host. My name is Kendra with a Y, not with an E. Let's have a KYNDversation. Today's guest is Jake Shapiro. Jake is the program manager for democracy initiatives at Interfaith America and a Jewish American from Washington, D.C. Jake spent the last 7 years working in peacebuilding in Israel, Palestine, holding various roles in dialogue facilitation, fundraising, M&E, strategic planning, and media. He helped to build and scale an organization called Tech to Peace that combines dialogue and technology training. Jake has worked for a number of bridge building and social justice organizations, including the International Center for Religion and Diplomacy and Pathways Institute for Negotiation. Jake holds a BA in political science from the University of Maryland, College Park. Jake was also a professional cook, and he loves to gather friends, family, and strangers over food, music, chants, and good times. Let's welcome Jake. Hey, Jake.
Hey, Kendra. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying yes to this conversation. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. I feel inspired by the opening video you put together. That's really beautiful, and I really related to making that space for folks kind of in the complex middle and folks that are searching. So thank you for creating the space and welcoming me into it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing what resonated with you, Jake. I love the language did you say the complex middle?
Hmm.
I love that. Talk to me more about your spiritual journey and how you have cultivated your relationship to the complex middle. I love that language.
Mm, yeah, my friends always make fun of me that I can't start any story without talking about my great grandfather, who's also my namesake. So I'm going to have to start there. So my great grandpa Jack Shapiro immigrated from Odessa to New York in the early 1900s. He was a Jewish immigrant who was fleeing persecution, pogroms, violence, and searching for the American dream, like many others. He came through New York to Newark and worked every kind of small, odd job before starting a small produce stand and eventually starting a bigger grocery store in rural Maryland in an all-Christian community. He was the only Jewish family. He raised his kids above the store. And he ended up becoming a beloved community member, a beloved friend and neighbor, as well as a political figure and helping even to elect a governor. And so I always start my story there because for me as a Jewish person in America, that's my vision for what being an American is, what being a Jew in America is. It's being friends with our neighbors. It's finding safety through connection, and really finding joy and meaning through connection with our neighbors as well. the way I was raised, Jewishly, I went to a Jewish preschool. There was, some talk of Israel in my house, some holidays, not anything particularly strong, but there was always some fire burning in me. When I went from Jewish preschool to public kindergarten, I came back from my first day livid that we wouldn't be celebrating Jewish holidays at public kindergarten. And where that sense of justice came from, I'm not sure. But then in the fourth grade, I became obsessed with the Holocaust. Like, I don't know which fourth grader is obsessed with the Holocaust, but something just really resonated with me and burned inside of me that I needed to care about these issues. And, as I grew older through high school, and then I took a gap year in Nepal and Indonesia to do service after my mom brought me to Haiti for a service trip. And in Haiti, I remember going to church in a cinder block church, just really made out of almost nothing, but, just appreciating so much how so little was needed to have so much spirit. And through those experiences with the world, I started to say, okay, there's a particular identity that I belong to that matters a lot, and there's many other beautiful identities that have so much meaning. And I also discovered that those things can sometimes feel like they contradict. Like, what happens when, I'm raised as a progressive person with progressive values, and folks are telling me, or I'm starting to feel like my values as a Jew and as a progressive person, maybe do they contradict? Do they align? Like, can I be proud of my people and care for my people and care for others? And so I think really grappling with those questions and feeling confused has led me to many other people that feel confused between their identities in many other different ways. And those are my favorite kinds of people, those people who are mixed up, who are questioning, who don't accept reality as it stands. And so I'm guessing, based on our conversations together and the introduction that you had here, that you might feel something related.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I so appreciate you bringing Grandfather Jake into the conversation. I think those that came before us and inform our trajectory is so important to lift their names. And I love how he was centered in it sounds like a predominantly Christian community, as an only Jewish man who owned a business there and who also lived there. And as a child, of course, you are framed by someone who is willing to either be uncomfortable or be perceived as bringing some discomfort. And you have leaned into it since a young child, starting to question, so why aren't we having Jewish holidays in this public school? And leaning towards justice early on in your childhood. So, Jake, I am curious about growing up, um, in your household. At what point did you start asking even broader questions about one of the polarities that you named, being a progressive and then also being Jewish? Some people might perceive that, like you said, to be incongruent. So, what were the questions that you began to answer that helped you kind of relax into the complex middle? Because the complex middle is a space that a lot of people stay away from. I think so many of the conversations that need to be had, particularly when we're thinking about diversity of faith, or even diversity of political views, they're not had because of the challenges and the textures that feel uncomfortable around the complex middle. So, how have you gotten comfortable being there, Jake? And what
Mm-hmm.
questions? How did your questions expand?
Yeah. I think, that trip to Haiti and then spending time in Nepal and Indonesia, I lived with a family in a village in Nepal. And I think, many, if not all of us, are raised, intentionally or not, to think that our way of life is like the best and potentially only, good way of living, right? Like, in a Western liberal framework, it's like human rights are universal. We should all work, for money and achieve material success,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera and so forth. We have like a basic set of beliefs that we share as a broader society, and that's just obvious to us, right? It's like, you might call that brainwashing if you saw it in a different group of people, right? If I see, Muslim people in the Middle East and I say, okay, women are wearing hijabs, they must be brainwashed to think that's good. But a Muslim person seeing, me take out student loans to go to college that I can never pay back, they might say, oh, he's brainwashed, for doing that, right? And so once you step outside of your bubble and you see that there's different good ways to live a life, I think that really breaks down, your soul narrative and enables you to see that there's different ways to think about many things, right? Um, and I want to avoid romanticizing other lifestyles in ways that are unhelpful. So for me, going to Nepal and seeing like that the family of farmers are really happy and that they have a lot of spirit and that the family is close and that the community is close, like those are all really good things that I want to value. And I also don't want to over romanticize and not say that their life is really challenging and that there's many, many advantages to being here in the West with the security and prosperity that we might have. But yeah, so seeing those things, and then I think at a certain point, like as Jewish people in America, we're kind of raised on two pillars, which are like most 80% of Jewish folks vote Democratic, at least in the past. So generally, Jewish Americans are raised on liberal politics, and then on Israel. Israel is a really important way that we connect to our Jewish identities, and it's something that's kind of tangible for a community that, the Jewish community used to maintain its identity because we had no other choice, right? We were in shtetls, we were in ghettos, we were not allowed to be part of the greater society. But here in the US, Jews are more integrated into American society than we've been in any other society in all of history. So suddenly we don't need to be Jewish anymore. So we've talked before about identity formation, right? And we talked about that at the convening we were at together. How do you keep a Jewish identity? How do you make it meaningful for people, right? And so for American Jews, Israel is a really easy, concrete, meaningful way to connect to our Jewish identity, to feel part of this thousands-year story, and to see kind of, in some ways, like a culmination of the story. It's like we've been praying for thousands of years to go back to this land, and we did it. Like, hooray! It's like amazing, in that way for a young Jewish American. And of course, without really learning about the other side. So at some point, when you learn about that there's another side to the story, and you've been raised on Israel and liberal politics, suddenly the liberal politics kick in and you're like, wait, I believe in certain things. I believe in universal human rights. I believe in universal human dignity. I believe that marginalized populations like us, Jews, should have freedom and the right to a good life. That's what we talk about every Passover. That's what we talk about, when we think about our historic relationship with the Black community in America and how we march side by side in the civil rights movement. So all of a sudden it comes time for us to ask ourselves, like, does this apply to other people as well, including the Palestinians? And so once, you can wake up to that reality, then you can start having the conversation, which for sure doesn't have easy answers, but I think, these are important conversations to have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for naming all that you've named, and I'm so glad we're getting to Israel early in our conversation, because Israel is such an important place both in Judaism and Christianity, and there are so many stories that Judaism carries around exile, liberation, covenant, and grief and hope when I think of the children of Israel. And so I'm wondering which story for you, Jake, has become most formative for your life.
Interesting question. Yeah. I mean, Passover is the obvious one, right? It's like really about liberation and justice. I think like the journey of Passover is really meaningful for me, like that the Jewish people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, they had to go through this 40-year journey in the desert. And that journey was really important because there were like ups and downs, and there was difficult moments, and there was like disagreement. And, there were like, the golden calf when we really failed and had to take a step backwards and like think about what we've done. But I think really like keeping that story of we were enslaved and now we are free, and really extending that to all people around the world. And then also just the tradition of Passover, like that we tell the story year after year, and through the act of storytelling that we really keep this communal continuity. Um, but I mean, I also think about like the founding of the state of Israel, and the stories that we hear growing up are like so magical and miraculous. I mean, when you learn it like we learn it, it's like a people who just came out of the Holocaust, who were oppressed all over the world, who have been in exile for thousands of years, who were surrounded on all sides by Arab armies, miracle of miracles, managed to fight back those armies and create a safe homeland for themselves. I mean, it's so amazing, right? And then just this heartbreak of knowing that our miracle was their catastrophe, that our independence was their Nakba. Um, and that heartbreak to me, and the contrast or lack thereof between the two stories, it's like, can I at the same time appreciate what many see as a miracle and appreciate the catastrophe that it led to? And that still, it still causes me pain all the time. And there's many things like that in the Holy Land that are like, it's not just like a little bit of contrast. It's not like it was like a little miracle and a little catastrophe. It was like a big miracle and a big catastrophe. Same thing, you go to Tel Aviv. Like, Tel Aviv is not just a good city, it's one of the best cities in the world. And it's 2 hours from Gaza for all, and all of its pain and suffering there. So it's not just an okay city and a little bit of suffering. It's like an amazing city and a lot of suffering. But we're taught, this is the last thing I'll say for now. There's a famous rabbi and philosopher called the Rambam, Moses Maimonides. And he wrote two seminal texts. One of them is an exact interpretation of Jewish law, or halakha, that says, like, the letter of the law, like, just very legalistic, super according to the rule book. And then he writes another book that's the exact opposite. It is like considered blasphemous at the time. It's called The Guide for the Perplexed, which is a pretty cool title as well.
It is a pretty cool title.
Yeah. And I haven't read the guide, but I read The Guide to the Guide by Mika Goodman, which is much easier to read. And The Guide for the Perplexed is like the complete opposite. It's considered blasphemous. He says there is no God. Actually, we create God on earth. And the prophets, actually, they were hallucinating, but what they said mattered because we believed in it. And one of the things he talks about in the book is that he says this book is full of contradictions and the truth is in the middle. He leaves the contradictions there. He doesn't resolve them because somewhere in the middle of those contradictions, and if I tell you the answer to the contradiction, it's not going to be as meaningful as if you grapple with it and you wrestle with it and you try to figure it out. So, as the Jewish people, we talk about we're the light into the nations, right? That's what we like to say. Maybe it's like an egocentric thing to say, but we think we're supposed to be a light into the nations. And so when I think about, okay, why did God put us into this situation? Why did God bring us through a Holocaust? Why did God bring us to the Holy Land only for it to lead to, the suffering of another people? Why? Maybe this intense contradiction is for all of us to figure something out together. And maybe that's how to make peace truly. That's on my optimistic days.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting the story of the Passover and the importance of telling that story, and the opportunity to really be present to the trajectory of the human experience in terms of how we experience the gamut of emotion, how we experience victory, how we experience challenge, defeat, and also holding the tension. Even I hold the tension in my body when you name appreciating the miracle of Israel, and also the demise of so many other cultures that are impacted, because some might name it occupation, some might name it other things when we think of colonization, because this issue is so complex. It's so much that sits in the middle. And there are so many, I think, headlines that people are drawn to, at least in the media here in the United States, that muddies a lot of what might be happening or what is happening. And so I'm wondering, Jake, when I think about you as a Jewish American who spent 7 years of your life doing peace building work in Israel, Palestine, what were some of the things that surprised you when you started doing the work?
Mm. I always said that the situation is much better and much worse than it appears. Um, and it's not to make light of either in either direction. Um, if I say it's better, it is certainly really bad, and if I say it's worse, there's also, elements of good. On the better side, like folks see the news and think that it's like a constant bloodbath over there. And during periods of violence, it can be, and obviously the last few years have been kind of constant violence, but in general, many people are living their daily lives, and even within, really, really hard situations, folks still find a way to live their daily lives. There's a few million Palestinian citizens of Israel, or Arab Israelis, or Arab citizens of Israel, however they prefer to be defined, that live alongside Jewish neighbors, and it's not perfect. There's many, many challenges, but you do see some form of coexistence there. Coexistence is a controversial term, but there is some form of coexistence, and that often surprises people.
Mm.
I think in doing dialogue, we brought together young Israeli and Palestinian folks for 12-day technology training and dialogue seminars, and it's kind of easier than people expect, which again might be a controversial thing to say, but if you get 30 young folks in the room and you get them under the same roof for 12 days and you get them working on things together, and it's not easy. Like, the dialogue is super hard. People yell, people cry, we talk about the hardest things. But if you're sure to talk about the hardest things, and if you do it in a productive way, like, people can see each other's humanity, and the starting point is so low. Like, people really, in many cases, don't see the other as human. I mean, you talk about dehumanization. It's like, Palestinians have only seen Israelis as soldiers at checkpoints, in full military gear, like just in terrible, terrible ways. And Israelis have only seen Palestinians as terrorists who are, blowing themselves up or stabbing them. And so when you bring people together, and it's like, okay, first of all, they're human. Second of all, we actually have a lot of the same interests. Third of all, like, in the internet age, like, we're looking at the same memes, by the way, and kind of living in the same, like, world online. Fourth, like, these people, through dialogue, we understand that they believe what they believe for a reason, right? It's not just because they're evil. It's because of the way that they've been raised and the things that they've seen. And so very quickly you can be like, okay, this is a human person with needs, and they might believe different things than me, but like, okay, at least they're human, and like, now we have something, right? So in that sense, it's always like, we always walked away from those seminars with new friends, with important, friendships across difference. Like, we have this beautiful community of Israelis and Palestinians who are truly our friends. And have been friends through October 7th and the ongoing events. And so people should know that there's many folks out there working towards peace and that live in the region and can meet the other. I think in the States, like, so many folks don't want to engage in dialogue because it feels like this life or death issue, but the people who are actually living the life or death are willing to do it. And the reason is because they see that the reality demands it. Like, Palestinian people living in East Jerusalem or even in the West Bank, like, they know Israeli, like, they need to engage with Israeli people, and Jewish Israeli people know, like, both sides, many folks know that this is the only way out. Like, the only way out is peace. So they're dealing with this reality as a reality, not as like a moral, or philosophical question, right? So I just want folks to know that, like, the people who are living in the reality, many of them are dealing with it in contact with each other. At the same time, it's much harder than some people think. Like, some people think that we're talking about a two-state solution, right? And for many Palestinian people, they want to return back to all the land from 1948. And many Jewish people, want to, either don't think that a two-state solution is possible or want to see, settlements or a greater Israel happen. Also, like, the terminology, like, when we talk about peace, Jewish Israeli people talk about the word peace and they mean a cessation of violence. Palestinian people talk about peace and they mean justice, right? So there's so many things that are, like, really further apart than even folks think. Like, folks think we're having peace talks about a two-state solution, but that's not even, like, we're not even close to that. We're just getting people to know that the other side aren't, like, vicious, bloodthirsty animals, right? So again, it's this contradiction of like things are much better than people think, and also in many ways much worse.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing more of the details of your peace building work in Israel and Palestine. It's so interesting when I think about just doing work around religious trauma. With people as a therapist, I understand how much religious identity for many, regardless of faith, is a matter of life and death. Which is why I think people are so bent on being right about their religious ideology, right? Because they've been raised to believe that this is connected to my life source. At least as a Christian, I was raised to believe that believing in Jesus was connected to my ability to not only make it into heaven, but for God to be pleased with me, right? And so when you begin to deconstruct those belief systems, it can become destabilizing. And one of the things that is sticking with me that you've named is that folks in Israel, Palestine, who are living through war, who are living through violence, who are living through so many things, are willing to be in conversation because the risk is high for actually not being here anymore, for your families not being here anymore. When it comes to the work, and the work as it starts out, at least from what I'm understanding you naming, is about building relationship. It's about getting people who are generally not in proximity to each other to be close enough to actually begin to understand the other. Not that they agree, but like you said, we're able to see each other's humanity. When it comes to the breakthroughs that you've been able to see in your peace building work over these 7 years, what have they been? And I'm not talking about breakthroughs where people are just changing their ideology, but a breakthrough in somebody having an aha moment to say, oh, that is what they mean, or I was wrong about this. Have you seen that in your work? I imagine that there's been some opportunities to experience that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I can think about a Palestinian guy who was sharing about, when Israeli tanks used to roll into his village, and they would physically shake his house, and he remembers being 7 years old, and soldiers from the tank came into his home, and he was playing video games, and they like turned his house upside down, and how painful that was for him, and terrifying, obviously. And you're sitting there, we're imagining this sweet boy that we love, Salah, as like a 7-year-old. He's a sweet boy as a 25-year-old, but we're now imagining him as a 7-year-old, like this child, and just imagining and seeing the fear in his eyes, and then a Jewish Israeli participant saying, wow, like when I think of Israeli tanks, I feel safety. They make me
Mm.
feel safe. And I see how they would make you feel threatened, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Or, having the Jewish Israeli guy who served as a soldier at a checkpoint. And we're talking about, we ask this question, we talk about violence, like, because it's two sides define different things as being violent.
Mm.
For example, Jewish Israelis define throwing rocks as violent. Um, and you have this Jewish Israeli guy who served as a soldier at a checkpoint, and you could see the fear in his eyes as he talks about these boulders being chucked at him. And for the Palestinians, they don't think of this as a form of violence, throwing rocks. So like, you guys have guns, you guys have tanks, you guys have all this protective equipment. How can that be violent? But you see it in this guy's eyes that it's terrifying. But then on the other hand, for example, Palestinians define the security barrier, or some people call it the apartheid wall, as violent. And the Jewish Israelis are like, how could that be violent? It's just a wall, right? And then you have a Palestinian person that tells us about how his mom was sick in hospital, and she had the opportunity to go to a Jewish Israeli hospital inside the wall. And he wasn't able to cross the wall to see her on her deathbed, and she passed without him being able to speak to her. So you can see how this wall is violent, right? But it's through these personal stories that we can understand each other. Like, if I'm just going to sit here and tell you that wall is violent, and I'm just going to say because you're a bad person and because the wall is bad, like, I'm not going to understand that, right? I'm just going to argue back. I'm saying, it's a wall, you can go around, you could climb over it. Actually, that protected our security. Like I can come at you with a million things, right? But when there's Amir, who I've come to like while I studied Python with him, telling me with tears in his eyes about how he couldn't see his dying mother because of this wall, suddenly I understand, right? But those are only understandings that we can have when we talk face to face. Like I can't get that from a book. I can't get that from social media. I can't get that from the news. I can only get that by looking eye to eye with someone, and I need them to explain it to me. I need to see it from them, right? And there's a lot of discourse about how like oppressed people, don't have the responsibility to explain themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I totally understand that, like in a world of justice, like it's unfair for traumatized and oppressed people to have to explain themselves, to do it over and over and over again. But we don't live in a fair world. We don't live in a world of justice. The oppressor or whoever, and I'm not going to define who I think is, oppressor and oppressed, because I don't see it as black and white, but the other side isn't just going to do their research and understand you. I need to see it in your eyes. And so that's why I think dialogue is so helpful, because we just get triggered otherwise by news and media and social media and yelling at each other. But when I care about someone and they tell me about their parent, about their grandparent, about their cousin, about their experience, that's when I can understand what they've gone through.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow, those stories are really powerful. Thank you for sharing those that you've mentioned. 7 years is definitely a long time to dedicate your life to, I think, one of the world's most painful conflicts. What kept you there for all 7 years, and what brought you back?
Good questions. Yeah, I never planned to stay. I never even planned to go, really, but I got an opportunity to go volunteer in a mixed Arab Jewish city after college, and looking back, it aligned with all of my life story. But in the moment, I was like, this sounds like a cool opportunity, and let me just try. Um, yeah, I mean, it felt meaningful to be a part of something. As a Jewish person, like, living in the US, like, it's a really big country, and there's many people making decisions, and you kind of feel like a small fish in a big pond over here. But over there in that land, it's a tiny land, it's tiny countries, um, and it's a tiny Jewish people. And to play my part in Jewish history and to try to be a leader in my people's history felt really meaningful. Um, the lifestyle over there, there's many benefits to it. You got the Mediterranean Sea, you got the sun, you got the fruits of the earth, that beautiful olive oil and tomatoes, and cucumbers, and all the amazing things that come there. um, and then really the relationships and the ability to contribute. As we started to build this nonprofit that was doing this peace building work, like, we would do seminar of 30 people, and we started to build up this community. And suddenly I find myself surrounded by hundreds of young Palestinians and Israelis that care about each other, that want to make a difference, that care about the world. And it's so beautiful to live in diversity like that. Like, we would speak Hebrew and English and Arabic together. We would listen to Hebrew music and American music and, Arabic music. We would eat each other's foods. We would, laugh with each other. And we developed even, kind of a full identity and language attached to just who we were as a community. And that's amazing. And I think, moving to New York, like, I'm surrounded by beautiful diversity here, but sometimes it feels hard to, like, truly live in diversity. Like, I feel like we kind of pass each other on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And at Interfaith America, I'm so lucky to have the chance to, like, engage with such diverse folks, and through the programming and through the staff, in deep ways. But yeah, and then just going through things together in Israel Palestine. I mean, I remember I started working for the organization in 2019, and in 2021 we had a really big round of violence. There was, like, interethnic violence in the streets. There was, rockets exchanged with Gaza. There was, like, protests put down violently. It was a really, really hard time. And we didn't know if our young, small community would make it through. And not only did the community make it through, but the close friends who were kind of the leaders of the community, we became even closer. And I remember just after there was a ceasefire, I remember sitting for a picnic in the hills of Jerusalem with 10 friends, half Israeli, half Palestinian. And the ceasefire had just been called, and we just sat and we laughed and we cried, and we were so happy to be together. And that moment I knew, like, these aren't just friends. This is, these are brothers and sisters for life. And so just going through, like, all these traumas together, and challenges, and, budget crises for the organization, and, like, the buses didn't come, or this person didn't get through the checkpoint, or there was an attack, or there was a war. Like all of these things you go through with people, it's like, how do you, recreate bonds like that? It's just so deep. So it's really the people and the chance to make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Given the opportunity to build community across faiths, across cultures, some people could see that as really subversive and problematic. Did you all face any challenge to thwart what you all were doing? And if so, how did you all navigate that?
Yeah. I think there's challenges to peace building, both like in many directions. Before October 7th, the context was generally this. It was generally Jewish Israelis either thought what we were doing was naive and innocent, or like destructive, because their conception of peace is like giving away land, which harms their security, right? But it was mostly like, just, you're kind of naive and dumb. Like, maybe this is a good idea. Like, it's cute. Haha, it's never going to work. And generally, the Palestinian perspective was one of anti-normalization. So if you know the BDS movement, boycott, divest, sanction, it's the idea that if Palestinians engage with Jewish Israelis, then they're normalizing the occupation and or the existence of Israel as a Jewish state. And so what should be done is to boycott completely. Now, after October 7th, we see an increasing anti-normalization attitude on the Jewish Israeli side as well, which is like, well, you shouldn't talk to them. Like, they just are bloodthirsty and they're going to stab you in the back. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard, this anti-normalization attitude, and it certainly persists. I mean, there's a famous quote in Palestinian society from, I think, Khaled Rafani, who says, why should the neck talk to the sword? That's, his perception of peace talks or dialogue. And, what I would say for me personally is, like, I really want both people, Jewish and Palestinian, to be free, to be prosperous, to be safe, to be secure, to have justice, to be able to live, in their homeland somewhere between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. And the way I see those things happening is through peace. I don't think either side is going to beat the other one militarily. I don't think either side is going to force the other one out. I don't think the world is going to force either side to leave. So eventually you're going to have two people in one land. And I don't know what else to do besides to make peace. And to make a just peace, not a peace that ignores the past, not a peace that, is one-sided or only, creates prosperity for one side, but a peace that's really prosperous. And, for example, you can see it in Belfast, which was, the heart of the Northern Irish conflict. And since their conflict ended, Belfast has become a hub of commerce. Many major tech companies have offices in Belfast as their European centers. And certainly, like, the benefits of that haven't been distributed well enough to a lot of the folks in Northern Ireland who were at the core of that conflict, and that needs to continue to be better. But just seeing the development in Belfast is just a testament to what can happen when peace is made. And so both sides in Israel and Palestine can benefit so much from new economic opportunities, from new freedoms, from new, just from not living in war. It's terrible to send your sons and daughters to die in war. It's terrible to live through round and round of trauma. It's terrible. Like, who wants to do that? No one. But people also don't have faith that it's possible. And each time they see peace, they see something bad happening to their side. Like when we talk about Oslo Accords, when we talk about the 90s, Jewish Israelis will say that peace failed because the Palestinians started the Second Intifada, and that we tried to make peace, they blew up our buses and our cafes, so no more peace. We tried to leave Gaza in 2006, we got Hamas and rockets in return on October 7th, so no peace. And Palestinians, they say, we tried to make peace, they built more settlements. We tried to make peace, they brutally oppressed us after our peaceful protest movement in the Second Intifada. So for both sides, they have these terrible connotations with peace, but again, it's like, you look at different ways to achieve liberation for both people. You can look at BDS, you can look at violent resistance, you can look at political action. And, I understand why people support these different approaches, and I understand why people are critical of the peace field. that asks people to come and talk to each other and sit in a room and etc. But I just, that's the way I see out of it, and I've seen it work. I've seen it work.
I've seen it work too when you bring diverse groups together in proximity to humanize both sides, all sides, really. Thank you for the language of anti-normalization and how that's situated in Israel and Palestine, particularly as it relates to the peace building work, your work, and other efforts that are going on there. I am also interested in the ways that you have. I'm thinking about a friend of mine who is putting together a workshop. She's put together a workshop called The Behavior of Liberation. She is a Buddhist humanist and has been practicing Nichiren Buddhism for about 24 years. And so the workshop puts Nichiren Buddhism in conversation with Baldwin, James Baldwin. And she talks about peace building as a practice. And I'm curious, how do you think about peace building? Is it a practice for you? Is it a state of consciousness for you? And what is peace? I've heard you name what peace is not, but what is peace for you, and what are the practices of peace?
Yeah, I mean, peace building is a constant practice, and you'll know that if you ever talk to your parents. Like you can go facilitate Israeli-Palestinian dialogue, but then you come home and your parents are asking you to clean up your old childhood bedroom, and you're like completely triggered. You're like, okay, I gotta practice what I preach. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, recently I've been thinking more in the terms of pluralism, right? Because at Interfaith America we talk about pluralism, and for us that means when folks of diverse identities respect, relate, and cooperate across difference. When we have basic respect for each other's human dignity, when we can build relationships, and when we can cooperate in meaningful areas, and that is a really helpful and simplified framework. In the peace world, you can talk about positive peace and negative peace, right? Like a negative peace is like the absence of violence, and a positive peace is something more substantive. Like a negative peace is a ceasefire, let's say, which just ends the violence. And we can look at, for example, in Bosnia Herzegovina, like their peace process started with a ceasefire, the Dayton Accords, which didn't really make any provisions for the future. It just created a negative peace. It stopped the violence. But afterwards, you started to see schools mixed between, the ethnic groups, and you started to see real peace building efforts. So in our NGO, I haven't thought about this for a while, but we define peace. We talked about three things: solution, peace, and justice. Right? And so peace, requires all of these things. And so when we talk about solution, it's more of that negative piece, like some sort of agreement that ends the violence, like the Good Friday Agreement or the Dayton Accords, or a two-state solution. This is solution. Justice is obviously, finding ways to account for and prosecute for the past. So whether that's through tribunals, through reparations, in South Africa, you obviously saw like land redistribution as a form of justice. And so different conflicts have different ways. In the Balkans, there was military tribunals. We have the Nuremberg trials as an example. So you can see different forms of justice. And then peace is really like positive interaction between people. So we see peace when there's, co-education, when there's cultural exchange, when there's, learning together, going to summer camp together. Like if you saw Dairy Girls, is a good show on Netflix about the Northern Irish conflict, and it has Catholics and Protestants that go to like a summer camp together. So that's peace. And so for us, like all three of those things need to happen, and there's not necessarily an order that they need to happen in, right? You have different places that have different order. Like I said, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, you had solution and then peace and then justice. In Northern Ireland, you had more of like peace because it started with dialogues. I think it's really important to bring up Northern Ireland. So in Northern Ireland, you had competing factions. You had Catholic loyalists, Catholic unionists and Protestant loyalists. And they fought and fought and fought. And finally, the way it's been taught to me, their two leaders were arrested and put in prison together and just met each other in prison and started talking, and they realized like this violence is so bad, we want it to end. And when they started talking, they didn't know what's the Good Friday Agreement. Like they didn't have this agreement in mind. They just started talking, and then step by step, with baby steps, they first, you know, did a reform to the police, and then they did a buyback of the weapons, and then, you know, little baby steps until there was enough trust and enough understanding to be able to create what became the Good Friday Agreement. And so when people ask me what's my solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I tell them baby steps, right? One state solution, two state solution, confederation. Like sometimes when we talk about these solutions, they feel so far away and impossible that we don't want to do anything at all.
Yeah.
But if you take baby steps, if you build trust, if you create examples of positive cooperation, like easing restrictions at checkpoints or bringing in new jobs, you know, or reforming educational curriculum, like these can be opportunities to show goodwill, to build trust, to get more people talking to each other and knowing each other, so that we can then, you know, step on those building blocks to create solutions that we might not even be able to imagine right now. Like we might not know what's the solution that we need, but if we get enough people talking to each other and understanding what the situation really is, then we can get to those solutions, right?
Mm-hmm. I love the solution of the small steps. That definitely can keep anxiety down and reduce overwhelm. How with doing the peace building work that you've done in Israel Palestine for all those years, hearing multiple trauma stories, hearing about lots of violence, how did you protect your spirit, your emotions, your psychological self during that time?
It was hard. I didn't do the best job. Um, I like people always ask me, did I leave because of October 7th? And I always say I should have left 2 years earlier. I mean, doing that work and like working in a small organization with many responsibilities, it really drained me, and in ways I think I wasn't even noticing at the time. And then, you know, seeing the world come down on October 7th and afterwards, and just constantly feeling the pain of both sides. It's like it's so much to feel the pain of one side, but to feel the pain of both sides, and then to hold the space for other people who are feeling pain. And a lot of people in that region just try to ignore it the best they can. I mean, they put it away in a closet somewhere, they repress it. But for us in that field, like we're like having our finger on the pain in the wound like every single day. And I really struggled, you know, for a few years there, until I got to Interfaith America and I had the chance to kind of see that like this work can be done in a responsible way that's responsible to myself, and, you know, that you can do the work a little bit slower and a little bit less intensely, and still make meaningful change. Because, you know, in this small peace building organization, we're just like frantic all the time. I mean, I think having like the people, and that was one of the hardest parts about the last few years, was that like the people in the community, the people I worked with, were the like only people in the world I felt could understand me, and I could understand them. And then, you know, after everything started, like we weren't together a lot, and part of me felt like I couldn't be in the land anymore, but it was also the only place I could be. So it's really painful. But I also think doing nothing wasn't healthy for me at the same time. Like I tried to like take a step back and think getting back into the work now and like doing something that feels productive and feels like it's making an impact, really helps to feel situated again.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your transparency, Jake. And I think so many people can resonate who are doing peace building work, who are doing other forms of activism work. I'm glad that you brought in your work as the program manager for democracy initiatives at Interfaith America. Before we go there, because I really want people to know about the amazing work that you are doing and that Interfaith America is doing. What would you have done differently in terms of taking care of yourself as a peace builder, as an activist, given what you know now? If you had another 7 years to go over to Israel Palestine, what would you do differently?
I mean, I know the right answer, but then I know my answer.
I want to hear yours.
No, it's hard because like I think one of the reasons that I was like good at the work, those are quotations, good at the work, was that like I was fully in it, you know, and like that I didn't put up boundaries. Like people knew that when I was facilitating, I wasn't like coming at them from above or from some understand, like from out of the process. Like I was in the process with them, and they could see that I was grappling and that I was struggling and that I was, inside of those complexities. And so I think like the right answer is to have more boundaries and to, be able to sign off after the 9 to 5, um, and to have boundaries between like personal life and professional life. But like that was my community. Those were my people. We were in it together. They were my friends all day and all night. I cared about it all day and all night. We were living surrounded by this horrible conflict. So yeah, I mean, I don't know which part of you turn off. I mean, maybe it's just the kind of work that you do in bursts and then you step away and then you come back. I don't really know, but yeah, I mean, I probably could have done a little more yoga, meditated a little more, et cetera and so forth. But I don't regret living fully in the moment and being part of the process with people.
Beautiful. I think that's a real answer, and I believe when you are in an experience where there's constant crises, then you are to respond accordingly. And so the luxuries and privileges that we would have to take some time to do yoga or to meditate may not be fully available, juxtaposed to context where you're not in a war zone all the time.
Yeah.
So thank you for that transparent answer. So tell me a bit more about the work that you do as a program manager for democracy initiatives at Interfaith America, Jay.
Yeah, so Interfaith America was founded in 2002 by Ibu Patel, who is a Muslim Indian immigrant to the US, um, on the notion that faith is a bridge that should unite us, not divide us. Um, it was founded in the aftermath of 9/11 when, religious identity was a really difficult and dividing subject in the US, especially with Islamophobia, but, also looking at the Sikh community and um, you know, other communities, it was really kind of the main identity marker. And so it was founded as Interfaith Youth Corps to bring together, especially young people across lines of faith and difference. Um, and in the last 20 years, Interfaith America has been really active in higher education and building, cultures of pluralism on college campuses. And in the last few years, we've expanded into like civic and democracy spaces, which is where I'm working. Um, in addition to that expansion, Interfaith America has kind of built on its legacy by focusing both on interfaith and now on civic pluralism, which posits that faith is not the only identity marker that's meaningful in society, but there's many different identities that can either be opportunities for division or cooperation. And so we're trying to work across identity lines in civic and democracy spaces to bring together diverse folks to strengthen American democracy. Because again, Israel Palestine is a hotter and smaller version of this, but in the U.S., like we live in a very diverse country, and we have to find a way to live together. It's just not an option. And some of the beauty of America has been the systems and institutions that have been set in place to manage this diversity, and not only to manage it, but to benefit from it. But as the country changes, and of course, like thank God that different groups have had more opportunities now, and that it's not such a monoculture. But as the country has changed, especially in the last 20 years, like it's raised a lot of new questions about can our institutions and our society handle these new ideas of diversity. And so we're really working to both be like a thought leader on how can diverse Americans live well together, and also try to like put that into practice on the ground.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing a bit more about Interfaith America. I believe when I first came into contact with Interfaith America in seminary, I think in 2007, it was Interfaith Youth Corps. And I am certainly excited that to be reconnected with you all. We had a convening with Black Protestant Interfaith Dialogue Roundtable at Ebenezer a few weeks ago. That was just super amazing. And so I'm so glad that Interfaith America is convening um, um, people from diverse faith traditions in their particular groupings to talk about what American democracy means through our diverse lenses as people of faith, as well as religious pluralism. As we are here at America's 250th year of existence. And so I am so glad that Interfaith America is doing work to bring us all together and to minimize so much of the vitriol and polarization and hatred that can take place because we aren't willing to be in close proximity enough to each other to have substantive conversations, to allow us to see our humanity more deeply, in whomever we're perceiving as the other. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing, Jake. I have three more questions for you before you go. As I think about the work that you've been doing over the past decade or so, I'm wondering if your younger self could see the work that you have been doing, if he would be surprised by anything or what he would be surprised by most.
Mm, thanks. Yeah, I've definitely had moments of like younger Jake would be really proud of you, which is nice. Um, I don't know what age younger. It all makes sense when you look at it in retrospect, right? Like with hindsight 2020, you're like, obviously, duh, this is like the pathway that I was on. I mean, I think about being a curious young kid who cared about being Jewish and cared about his neighbors and comes from this family that cares about their neighbors. And it all makes sense in that way. But yeah, I think, I've just had a lot of opportunities. I've had a lot of privilege, and I've tried to take those opportunities and use my privilege to do good for other people. And I feel proud of that. So
Mm, mm. Thank you. What belief do you feel like you've had to unlearn to live?
a belief I've had to unlearn.
Yeah.
Hmm. I mean, I think like developing the practice of radical modesty and
Mm,
radical empathy, like to the point that, like, there was a point in my time in Israel Palestine when I was, approaching conversations like, not only may I not be right, but I'm going to assume that I'm not right as I start this
mm,
conversation. Um,
good.
and for someone that's been like, described as like self-assured or even like a know-it-all, unfortunately, that's like a hard thing to do. So but it's so important, and it's confusing also when you practice radical empathy, because then you're like, what do I actually believe? Do I have red lines? Like, everyone seems right. And it's not a place to be in forever, but I think it's an important like period to go through to really just expand your mind and to be able to like see the value of different people's perspectives.
Mm, I love that. Radical modesty. I appreciate that. My last question, the kind in conversation stands for knowing yourself in need of devotion. What does devotion mean to you in this season? And are there any concepts, ideas, or practices that you're devoted to right now to support yourself?
Mm. So in the Jewish Torah, that we have 613 commandments, or is it 18? 613. I should have just gone with my gut. Um, and I forget how many it is exactly, but there's more commandments that describe the relationship between humans than the relationship between human and God.
Mm,
So what does that tell us? And it relates to the guide for the perplexed. Like, I see godliness in the relationship between humans. I see godliness in the way that we treat each other, in laughter over a shared meal, in that warmth and energy when you're in communion, when you dance together to the same beat, or you all have the same realization at the same time, or you see a moment of profound learning. And so my devotion is to people, is to relationships, is to community. And I'm so grateful for the folks that I get to interact with at Interfaith America, with the participants in our programs like you, with our partners, and that gives me, that's my devotion, and what I want to continue to do is just to live godliness in the relationships between humans.
I love that. Live godliness in the relationship with other humans. Thank you for the work that you do, Jake. Thank you for your time here today to be in Kind Conversations with me. And thank you all for tuning in. For those of you that will listen to this recording, remember that your life is sacred, your voice matters, and your becoming is holy. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Kind Conversations, and love, like, and share. And if you're interested in therapeutic, spiritual direction, or organization development, consultation, and change services, please email Kind Consulting, that's KYNDCONSULTING at gmail.com. Until next time, stay devoted to the divine within you, peace and abundance.